Test. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say hi really quick. I'm not doing the introduction, but Deb Sundblad will, but just wanted to let you know, first of all, welcome to St. Olaf for those of you who may not be parishioners. If you need a bathroom, down the hallway to your left, you will find the restrooms. And mi casa, su casa, make yourself at home. And so we'll be starting in just a few minutes. And also for those watching online, welcome. I'm glad you were able to join us for the live stream. So we'll be with you in just a moment.
And I was the unlucky one. Good evening. Thank you for coming this evening. It's really nice to see as many of you here that there are. As All Souls was celebrated and remembered, we felt that it was perfect for Greg Fahrman to speak on losing family members. Greg's book, We Could Have Been a Train Wreck, addresses this. After his presentation, refreshments will be served. At this time, if you would like to talk to Greg, he will be available. After the refreshments, the PCCW will hold their November meeting. All of you are welcome to attend. Again, thank you for coming. Mr. Greg Fahrman. Yay!
I want to thank the PCCW for having me speak tonight, and to everybody in the St. Olaf Parish. St. Olaf has always been an integral part of our family, especially my parents. When we were going through the tragedies, Mom and Dad relied heavily on St. Olaf's and the clergy here, and that helped them get through. This was our safe harbor. It was our rock, and the history goes way back. St. Olaf's, as a kid, we actually moved into the corner house on the corner of Monroe and North Lane the day after President Kennedy was shot. Dad lived there 58 years. He died this past August 3rd, but he lived there 58 years. And he and Mom wanted to live by a Catholic school and a Catholic church and raise their kids in that environment. He was the only child and he moved around a lot. So when he found Mom, he was going to have 9 kids and live by a Catholic church. And he did. And that was real important to him. St. Olaf's, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. As a kid growing up, and I went through 8 grades here, my 8th grade time here, our mother was a convert. She grew up in a little church in Chimney Rock between Independence and Oliva, but she converted to Catholicism, and she was a true Catholic that followed all the rules. We went to confession every Saturday. The Fahrman kids would march across here to go to confession, and I always wondered what the neighbors thought. You know, what are those kids doing? And I ended up serving Mass for the nuns and Father Minen my whole 8th grade year at 6 a.m. She volunteered me for that. I thought it was one day, it was a whole year. But getting back to why I'm here, between 1983 and 1993, we had 4 tragedies in our family. The first one was October 8th, 1983. Our young brother Jeff died of cardiac arrhythmia. He just collapsed and he couldn't be revived. We had never had a loss in our family other than a grandparent. And that was our first experience with grief. And it was very difficult for all of us. We all had different reactions to it. A few years later, and what I'm going to talk about, I'm just going to outline these 4 losses. Then I'm going to talk about things we did to get better. A few years later, I get a call from Mom. I'm living in Janesville, and she says, Susie's been murdered. And I said, Mom, murdered? People like in our family don't get murdered. What happened? And sure enough, she was. She was raped and murdered by somebody that should have been in jail for a previous attack. Then, a few years later, we had a lot of anger with Susie's death. Then a few years later, our brother Jan, who was a heavy drinker at the time, he did not recover from Susie's death. And he died of alcoholism on October 6, 1991. Now, let me back up a little bit. On September 15th, 1988, my wife Diane was diagnosed with breast cancer. And we had 2 little girls. Kate was 3 and Laura was 1. So then we fought that battle for a long time. And that was probably one of my low points, because I do believe in prayer. I do believe in God, life after death. But that night, I think my prayer started out something like, you got to be kidding. We're going to do breast cancer now on top of everything else. And it was really probably my lowest point. But we fought that. Diane was so positive through the whole thing, and that's where I think God blessed us. Her attitude was phenomenal. And some of Diane's family is here today. Her sister Sue and her Sue's husband Art are here. They were there with us much of the time when Diane was fighting cancer. But she was so strong, and that's what helped us get through this. And that's why I think I'm standing here today talking about this. But Diane, her life is BC and AD, before cancer and after diagnosis. And she wanted the AD years to be as special as the BC years. And they were. And it was her strength that got us going. Grief needs to be beat. There's too many problems, too much anger, too many train wrecks, too many dominoes falling as people didn't deal with grief properly. It has to happen. This little book, We Could Have Been a Train Wreck, and I'm not a writer, I'll be the first to say it. This is my story. We self-published. Had a friend at Digicopy that helped us with the cover and some of that stuff, and we put it together. But it's our story, and it's true, and it all happened. And a lot of it was written 28 years ago, and then, it was a bigger book then. And I've got a little note in my office that says, from Mark Twain, that famous quote, if I would have had more time, I would have wrote a shorter letter. And that's what I was getting at, because when Diane died, we had a couple friends and people at school that gave me all these grief books, and they're about this thick, and I got 7 of them in my office, and I've never read them. I was way too busy with 2 little kids, being an assistant principal that was about to be a principal. So anyway, the book is written to be read in 2.5 hours. It's written to be talked about and discussed, and hopefully it'll help people. Because the hardest thing, you're always trying to find hope when these things happen. I remember when Jeffy died, I thought, man, are we ever going to be the same? Are we going to be able to live a happy life again? And then these other things started happening too, and it just kind of built up. Life after death, that's one of the sections in the book. And like I said, I believe I'm a spiritual person. I pray, I believe in God, I believe in life after death. But when a loved one dies, the most important thing we can tell ourselves is that they are happy. They're living in heaven. And that's what we said. It's hard to explain. I remember telling the girls, Mom's in heaven. She's happy. And she doesn't have cancer anymore. Then a week goes by, and then one night Laura you know, that she was only 6. She said, boy, I really want Mom back. Can she come back? And Kay said, no, this is how it is. When you die, you die. And she's in heaven. And the Lord says, well, what does she do in heaven? And that's a good question. I wish somebody would write that book. And a book for kids. What do we do in heaven? Because that was, Katie would say, well, does she have a job? You know, does she miss us? How can she be happy in heaven and we're not there? That was the big question. So we talked it through and we decided on this, and that helped us. We decided that Mom was cancer-free and she was as happy as she could be without us in heaven. And we could talk to her. We could tell her about our day, and that she could look down on us and see what we're doing. So let's put on a good show and show off a little bit for Mom. And that, you know, that's kind of how we left it. Then we didn't talk about life after death anymore. We didn't talk about heaven. Punishment. For a long time, I wondered if I was being punished. You know, I think our whole family went through that. And I got to thinking back, you know, what? Yeah, I did a couple stupid things in college, but I don't think it merited this, you know, this kind of punishment. But anyway, I think we all think that. And I remember we had 2 priests in our lives at St. William's. One was Father Bob Reardon, and the other was Father Bill McBride. And Father Bob would always say, Greg, you know what? God will never give you more than you can handle. And I didn't like that, because I knew Jan didn't handle what God gave him. Jan was our one train wreck. He didn't handle it. And I told Father Bob, you know, what if I do handle this? Does that mean I get another one of these again? So you got to work through that. But anyway, Father Bob passed away, but Father Bill, he left the priesthood. He lives in New York. He's a writer. He's an actor. He's married, and he has 2 sons, and I still talk to him. And he truly is inspiration. One section of the book is entitled Laughter and Having Fun. And I think that's important. When you are grieving, when you're in deep grief, things are really heavy. You don't feel good. You're not sick, but you're just going through the motions. And one of the things Diane and I talked about before she died is that we want the kids to laugh, to have fun. And we built in these fun Saturdays. A lot of Kenosha. Diane's parents were so close to us, and all her siblings were there. And we'd go to Kenosha a lot. But we'd also have our fun Saturdays, and we'd go to Madison. And it was the same every time. We did this for about 4 or 5 months. And we'd go to Chuck E. Cheese. We'd have pizza. We'd play the games. We'd go to Westtown Mall and see a movie. I think we saw Mrs. Doubtfire 9 times. And then we would go shopping. And that was our day. One time, my brother Jim came with us. He came down to help me Christmas shop because Diane died on Thanksgiving weekend. So Jim came down and we went Christmas shopping at Toys R Us. He had somebody watch the girls, and we got through that season. But it was important that we celebrate all those seasons and be part of that. That was really quite critical for us. And there are times when you're grieving that you'll feel this burst of happiness. And it's important that people know. The first time I experienced it was about 5 weeks after Diane died, and I'm driving to work at Orfordville Parkview, where I was the assistant principal, and I get this burst of happiness, and it was like, I'm going to make it. And then all of a sudden, it goes away. I started feeling guilty. I was feeling happy, and it just went away. But when you get those bursts of happiness, when you're dealing with deep grief, you've got to embrace them because they're so important. It's a glimpse of a new future for you. It's a glimpse of an exciting, positive time. Another section of the book is entitled Talk About It. There's a lot of different things that we've just got to get out and talk about it. One was when I went back to Parkview after Diane died, It was tough. I was the assistant principal. I had been a teacher for 12 years. I came through the ranks. I was close to the staff. And the first day I get my hot lunch and I go in the staff workroom and it gets real quiet. And I felt so bad for them. They didn't know what to say to me. And so I asked the principal, Don Albright, if I could have a meeting with the staff. And I said, we've got a big elephant in the hallway and we got to get it out of here. And he said, sure. And I talked about the fact that, yes, this is tough for me, but you know what? I'm going to come to work every day, and you got to do exactly what you've always done. We're going to have conversations about the Packers, the Bears. We're going to have conversations about small talk. We're going to do it all. It's not always going to be heavy. And please don't avoid me. I will get better as time goes on. And if I am having a real bad day, I won't be here. And it was great. Everybody hugged each other. There was a lot of tears, and we got the elephant out of the room. Kathy, my wife Kathy, came into our lives when we got married in 98. And she has always been one that would sit down with the girls and talk about how important it was to bring up Diane and talk about her. And Kathy was wonderful at it. I thought Diane was so unselfish during that last year of her life, but Kathy's been very unselfish all the way through this. And the girls eventually realized that they didn't have to give up one mom for another mom. And they could have both. And that was so important. She always said, I will never replace your mom, but I will love you like my daughters. And that took a while. Now, we have grandchildren. Kate has two little girls, identical twins, Gabriella Diane and Madeline Mavis. And they have this wonderful grandma, Nana. And Laura, too. She's got her two boys and little Gigi, and they have this wonderful grandma. Mom was the one, Mavis Fahrman was the one that always told us to talk about it, to get things out, and she would remember the dates of anniversaries of death dates and things like that. And we'd always talk about that person. And Mom was great at it. And she'd sit down and we'd talk about it. And it's very appropriate I'm bringing this up now because today, November 9th, is the 6th anniversary of her death. She died November 9th, 2015. My brother-in-law, John, also lost his mother on November 9th. So all these dates, they pop up and you talk about it, and that's how that goes. But Mom was great at that. But you see, Mavis, when she was on the farm in Chimney Rock, when she was 9 years old, her mother died giving birth to a little boy who also died. And they went through, she's a 9-year-old youngest of 6 kids. And when they came home, our grandpa said, okay, this is a bad deal. We got to make some changes around here. But you know what? We don't have to talk about this anymore. And that's how it was. And my cousin Dennis Matson, he did a lot of genealogy stuff in County and looked things up. Well, our grandpa, his family, there were maybe 8 kids, and I think 2 made it to adulthood. I mean, death was so present at that particular time. But Mom believed in talking about it and getting it out there. And, she was good at it. Dad, he would be kind of a silent griever. He'd drift into the kitchen. And I got to catch myself because I do this too. But he'd drift into the kitchen, listen a little bit, make some grandiose comment, and then he'd go back in the living room. And Mom would say, Jerome, if you're going to make a comment, get out here and get in the conversation. But that's how they worked through it. There's another section of the book entitled Small Problems. I found out that once you get through and you conquer grief, you have a tragedy in your family and you actually conquer it and you're feeling better. Maybe it takes a couple of years, maybe it takes 1 year, maybe it takes 10 years, but you're actually making it and you're having these feelings of success. The small problems you used to worry about are kind of gone, because you conquered a really big problem. And I think that helped me become a better principal. I was more of a counselor than I was a principal. I was a better listener. And by the time I came to Altoona and ran into people like Rod Christ, a fantastic counselor who's here tonight, I was already becoming more counselor-like. And that was so important because the small problems, that I remember when I first became assistant principal, a teacher would bring a kid in and say, "Hey, Mr. Fahrman, he hasn't turned in any work for 3 days. You're the assistant principal. You got to do something, man. You got to crack down on this kid here and make it happen." And I realize now there were a lot of other problems for this young man other than getting his assignment in or doing great on a test score. Finding forgiveness. This is the toughest part. And that whole thing with Susie's murder and the person that took her life being out on a signature bond, and our conversations with the DA at that particular time, and Mom used to get so upset with this because the DA would say, "Well, he always showed up for his court appearances. That's why he had a signature bond. He always showed up." Yes, he killed Susie on the morning of January 20th, and that afternoon he showed up in court and his signature bond was extended. So you can see the level of anger we had at that particular time. Now, this particular person has gone through a lot of treatment, went through a trial a couple years ago, and was found by a jury of 7 people, was found to be ready to be out in the public and was no longer a danger. So let's hope that happens. He's had a ton of therapy. And but forgiveness is something you got to be on. My sister Tricia, early on, she sat down for 4 hours face to face with this person to ask real important questions about Susie's death and how things happened. And she's the one that first coined that phrase, you got to be on a road of forgiveness. So when I interviewed with the press after he was released on his own reconnaissance and was a free person, they asked how I felt. And I said, well, it's time for me to get on the road of forgiveness, because the forgiveness isn't for him, it's for me. I'm a better person. I'm a better dad, better husband, better kid, better son, better brother when I'm on the road to forgiveness. If I'm holding on to anger and I don't have in my DNA to try to get even or hurt that person, what am I doing with that anger? And I talked to the press about that. And then people would come up to me at Walmart, some people I knew, some I didn't, or Quick Trip, and they'd say, how can you ever forgive that person? And I can tell you this, forgiveness is for me, not for him. And it's so important that we're on that road. If you're blaming somebody for the death or loss of a loved one, it's important you're on that road. Avoid excuses. I often told the girls, especially when they hit middle school and high school, so severe when I say it, but I talk through it with compassion. I would say to them, we will never use mom's death as an excuse to misbehave or underperform. Now, can you imagine an 8th grade girl, a 6th grade girl listening to that from their dad? In other words, you want to make the best of your talents, and we're going to do that. We're not going to use it as an excuse. We're through this. We've made gains already. We're going to continue to celebrate our lives and our talents because that's what mom wants, and that's what we want. So avoid excuses. That's so important. Celebrate. There was a time, as you go through this, and you start to feel good at certain times, you got to pat yourself on the back. Our whole family. 2014, Thanksgiving Day, fell on November 27th, which was the 21st anniversary of Diane's. And I wrote a letter to my siblings and their families. And I was so elated and so proud of how everybody has been doing and how they've done since then. We've had some tremendous accomplishments from grandchildren of my parents, just doing awesome things. And every December 25th, except last year, but we're getting back on track, we always rented out the lodge at Beaver Creek, and that was our Christmas. And when we all got there, there were over 50 of us. And you'd look around and see the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, they're all over, and they're all doing so well. And in that letter, I said, we could have been a train wreck. We could have really screwed it up, but we didn't. We didn't. And we can thank God for that. We can thank prayer for that. We can thank ourselves for doing the right thing. Dashboard notes. I've got a number of pages in here where I put the Post-it notes. I'd use them and put them on my dashboard on the car, and then I'd also put them on my morning mirror. And then eventually they'd end up in the girls' lunch boxes. And that went on till about 8th grade when Katie finally said, Dad, if you're going to do those notes, could you put them in a place where they don't fall out when I open my lunch pail or my bucket? And so we kind of let it go at then. But my first note that I wrote down that I held on to for a long time is, Diane is happy and pain-free. Because that is so important. If you've dealt with anybody that's dying of cancer, you know how tough it is at the end, where you start praying for death. And knowing she was pain-free was so important to me. Others are, I'm not being punished, embrace forgiveness, let go of anger, I will feel better, okay? Those are all things. And I know people use these notes all the time. There's a commercial about a little boy going to school, and his mom is always giving him notes. I'm a great reader. I'm a great reader. And the kids think, I'm a great reader. So that helps them become a great reader. Couple things in closing. Can't believe I'm going to do it in a half hour. I was so worried. And, here, before I do the closing, I just want to mention that I'll be here if anybody wants to talk about any of this or has any questions. My wife, Kathy, will have some books for sale in the back. I know there's refreshments, and I know the parish council group of women has their meeting. In the book, I asked the girls if they would collaborate and write forward for the book. And, they'd have to get together and work it out and write the forward. And a couple days go by, and I asked, how's it going? And they both said, Dad, can we each have a forward? Can we do forwards? And I said, you know what? We're self-publishing. We don't have an editor. We don't have a publisher. We don't have a sponsor. We can do whatever we want. So they each wrote a forward. And it's amazing how close they were and the things they picked up on. And as I read through their stuff, it reminds me, and I've got to emphasize this, so much of this was a collaboration of so many families. I think of my extended family. I think of the Farakas, Diane's family. I think of Kathy's family. Everybody pulled together to make this happen for these girls. It wasn't just me. And that's what's so important. I think when you're dealing with grief, you have to identify, who do I need and who needs me? Who do I need and who needs me? I think that's so important. This is a paragraph out of Katie's forward 1. My mom had a wish and my dad carried it out. That wish was that we would live life to the fullest, even after she left. That we would continue to live, have fun, laugh, and love deeply. I now realize what she really meant is that we don't get to die too. Her death couldn't kill us. The loss of that person is not worth the loss of you too. It can't be, for your sake or for theirs too. You have got your life to live, and there are people living who need you more than you know. Diane would be so proud of that because that's exactly what she wanted. When Katie talked about we couldn't die too, it was more of an emotional death. We couldn't quit living. We couldn't quit developing our talents just because mom died. We couldn't use it as an excuse, and that is so powerful. And Laura's paragraph I'm going to read to you is from forward number 2. Grieving will be part of our life journey, but it's just a part. It's how we choose to react, how we choose to live. That's the rest of our story. Let this book be your guide, your resource, and an aid to your ability to find hope. We need a world that is courageous enough to be on a journey of healing. Rather than hurt and fear, we want that for all of us, to be able to live amongst people who are happy and healed. You get to create the rest of your story. Choose to live life to the fullest. As my mom would say, make it a memory-making day. Powerful. So proud of those girls. Today, Katie lives in New York. Her husband's a firefighter. They're going through some tribulation in terms of what's going on there. But they raised their 2 little girls who are in first grade. Kate has been in the fashion industry. She may get back into it, but during the high-end fashion dresses weren't in demand. So but Laura is a coordinator of the 4K program in Altoona. Her husband Ben works at B&B Electric as a businessman, and they have Calvin, who's 7, and Louie, who's 5, and little Virginia, who's 1. So we have these wonderful grandchildren that have been part of our life. I retired from Altoona in 2012, and Kathy retired from the university in 2013. And we've been busy doing a lot of things for my parents, and then the grandkids came. So it's been really wonderful. I want to close with something that really just struck me about 2 months ago when Dad died. I told you before, when he passed away and the funeral was here, everybody that came up, and I said this and they said this, boy, 92 years, great life. He had a great life. And 58 years married to the same woman. Great life. Yeah, he had those losses. The kids died. That was tough. But he died with his boots on, or his boots were close by in his own house. Dad, we wanted to get him back home. He was in the nursing home for 5 weeks, but he wasn't making much gain in terms of his rehab. The bottom line was he's chewed tobacco for 72 years. And the people at the nursing home and hospitals, they don't have a sense of humor when you ask them, can he chew some tobacco when he's here? So he wanted to come home, and he came home, and we took care of him. And first we stayed nights, and then it was just days, and then pretty soon he was taking care of himself. But I remember about 5 weeks after he died, I'm over there doing the grass like I always did. I did the lawn and the snow blowing for him. And then I'd usually run out to Burger King and get a couple Whoppers for us to have for lunch. He'd stretch his out about 3 days because he didn't have much of an appetite. But he would, we'd have a couple Whoppers together, and he always joked around. He would say, I tell people that is 70 years old. See, I turned 70 in June. And he said, yeah, the kid that cuts my grass is 70 years old. And then he'd laugh. And, that day, 5 weeks after his funeral, I didn't shed a tear at his funeral. That day I mowed the grass. I went to Burger King, got a Whopper, came back, sat in the lawn chair by the garage, and I cried. because even though we had 92 years, it would have been great to have 93. And here's the thing you got to remember. Never, ever minimize your grief. If you lost a spouse that you've been with for 65 years, you're still going to miss that person a lot. Don't minimize it. And now, from now on, when I go to a funeral and it's a person that lived a long life, or I'm talking to the spouse and they were married for 60 years or whatever, I'm going to make sure I stay away from that long life business and talk more about you're still going to miss them. All grief is worth grieving. Never look at somebody else's grief and say, oh, that's terrible. Look what I shouldn't feel so sad. My load is not that big. But you know what it is? A separation. During the pandemic, we got grief all over the place, and we've got anger all over the place. And we've got to get to the bottom of these things. But the important thing is, like the title says, we could have been a train wreck. I'm so thankful that we haven't. And Jan was our train wreck early on, but everybody else, all those other 50 plus, have phenomenal resumes and are doing great things out there. And it's just really quite unbelievable. I told the girls, there's a lot of notes from Diane, journals. She journaled a lot to the girls. And there's another book there. And I told them, you're better writers than I am. And so maybe if there would be another book, another train wreck 2 or something like that, it wouldn't be that name, though, because the girls hate that name. And I remember Katie saying, why do you want to put train wreck on the cover of your book? I said, well, that's what we could have been. And that's what happens sometimes if you don't successfully. So with that, I'll be around if anybody wants to have a conversation or talk or ask questions about the book if you've read it. But I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is really my first speech on grief to a larger crowd. I've talked to some smaller groups. And of course, when I was a teacher and school administrator, I did high school graduations and speeches there, and that was a lot easier. But this is really close to my heart. But I'm so proud of where we are today. And I think back, and the prayers, when I prayed that prayer about, you mean we're going to do breast cancer now on top of everything else? I kept saying, please let it have a happy ending. Well, it didn't have a happy ending, but you know what? I gained strength in so many ways. I know there was a spiritual energy that was helping me get through this. And Diane was blessed with this spiritual energy as she left this world. She didn't leave kicking and screaming. She left teaching us lessons. And it's those lessons that carried us through. Thank you for being here tonight. Once again, I'll hang around. There's refreshments in the back, and the Parish Council of Catholic Women's meeting will take place. And Kathy does have some books if you're interested in purchasing one. Thank you.